Hello, and welcome to the Visionary Leaders Community Call, where we dive deep into wellness solutions using essential oils and other medicinal plants. We all honor the gifts of our earth, and we are very happy and excited you are here with us today. If you would like to learn more about our community, please visit www.hellovisionary.life. Please follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and of course, give us a 5-star rating on this podcast. We would love that. We have incredible topics each week, so be sure to come back and bring your friends. And if you are new to essential oils and or doTERRA, please know by the end of this call, you will know the 3 cool things about essential oils, the 3 ways to use essential oils, why doTERRA is set apart from all of the rest, and how to get these beautiful oils into your home at the best price. So today we have a very relevant topic. We are going to be discussing trauma and grief, and I'm going to pass the call over to Dr. Josie to introduce our guests.
Thank you, Aisha. Welcome everyone to our new format. I'm Dr. Josie Schmidt, naturopathic physician, and I am so excited to introduce our 2 guests, Dr. Louise Rose and Ariana Harley. Now I'd like to, there they are doing some waves. I'm going to introduce them both, and then we're kind of going to do some back and forth. And so we're going to think of this as a roundtable and discussion, and we're really going to work into this topic. So Dr. Louise Rose is a naturopathic physician like myself. I met her at school, and she is a former chef. And she's a neuroplastician. And you might be wondering what that means. I was wondering too. What that really means is she helps people get out of stuck neural grooves and helps them to stimulate new brain connections. She believes in the healing power of nature, particularly the therapeutic action of water, of plants, and of light. Now, working with Dr. Rose, she's going to be working with you, and she works with her patients at Rose Cabinet Medicine in Portland, Oregon. And she helps people to reconnect with their inner vitality, increase their energy, and become more emotionally resilient. I love working with her.
Thank you.
And Ariana Harley, our beloved Ariana friend. She is an essential oil educator with a passion for self-love, joy, and abundant health and happiness. She coaches on essential oils, the support in them in physical, emotional, spiritual, and financial realms. Ariana has studied with Clear Mind International for 3 years as a counselor and transpersonal psychology counselor with a BFA from the Pacific Northwest College of the Arts. She's been working with essential oils as a coach for 10 years and offers life coaching sessions. So, ladies, I'm going to start with you, Louise. Louise has a whole background in basically, if we're going to be concise, I'm going to say the nervous system, the entire nervous system. So she's going to give us a little bit of beginning and basis for a discussion with that. And I do have a question. Do you want me to ask it now, or you want me to
I think a little later.
Okay.
A little lay of the land.
Some basis, yes.
That work? All right. Let's see if I can share my screen here. Sorry.
And by the way, if you're listening to the podcast, don't worry too much about the screen being shared. We're going to send out any protocols that we're given, but it's a great reason to jump on Zoom with us. So hopefully next week you can come live on Zoom.
I just wanted to open this presentation with a little quote from Mary Oliver, a very short little poem that says, "We shake with joy, we shake with grief. What a time these two have, housed as they are in the same body." And I wanted to set the tone with that because, talking about trauma and grief is very heavy, and sometimes people would just kind of rather make their world smaller so they don't have to go through those transformative sessions of working through their difficult emotions. But when we do the work, we expand our capacity for joy in life. And so I believe that all human emotions are just part of being human. And when they become problematic is when we get stuck in them. So just to set the tone with that, little Mary Oliver. Here's a little more information about Ariana. If you want to get in touch with us, we are welcome to, we love hearing back from people and hearing what's working as well. This is my contact information. And I just wanted to take a minute to talk about why I partner with doTERRA, because if you're new to this community, you might be thinking, you know, there's all sorts of essential oils. Why are there so many doctors who work with doTERRA? And it's because of their commitment to purity and therapeutic action in the oils. So if you don't know, doTERRA is setting the standard in the industry for their quality control and their testing along the way. So as a physician, it's really important to me that if I'm using an oil with a patient, that this bottle of lavender has the same value and therapeutic action as the next bottle of lavender oil. And you might not know, but that is not true for most other companies in the industry that's unregulated. So we're really passionate about doTERRA's commitment to quality, and it's really important to me as a physician, and that's why that's all I use in my practice. All right, so jumping right into our topic here, I know this looks like a really big slide, and I promise I'm going to break it down for you a little bit. This is a representation of what happens in our nervous system when we feel activated or threatened. And I want to point out just briefly in the beginning that our nervous system can be activated with a perceived threat. So we are designed to respond to threat by moving into more of a sympathetic fight or flight state. You see that in the middle in the red pink zone. But when we get to the little dotted line there at the top, that is where I think is the difference between just being stressed out and having a traumatic experience or having a response that could have potentially long-term traumatic events. So the difference there is you can see it's the place of overwhelm. So trauma is sort of defined by being activated to the place where you cannot cope anymore with the stressor. So let's just briefly break down what's going on here in the slide. In the bottom here, you see the green. This is where we feel safe, we feel connected to other people, we can look people in the eye, we can gauge their response from us and get those cues of safety. We are grounded, we are more able to experience joy and community. And then if you look over on the right side, you can see all the physiological things that happen. This is where our health is the best. Our digestion is working, we're able to go to sleep when it's time to go to sleep, we're able to wake up when it's time to wake up, and we're able to basically go with the flow of life. And then the big mountain line that goes up and down, that is where we start to perceive a threat. And you see it gets up, 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 up. So that means the threat is not going away and our nervous system is responding with increased cortisol, adrenaline, our heart rate goes up, our blood vessels constrict, our digestion shuts off, our hormones shut off, because we don't need to digest our food when we're in the middle of a big nervous system activation. And then if the threat does not go away and it gets to the point of overwhelm, the top part is where we go into sort of the fight or flight, the freeze or flood or dissociation. And you'd be surprised how many people flip into dissociation or freezing or flooding without really knowing it. And just a little tip here, a great oil, if you are somebody that's familiar with dissociation, is peppermint. So peppermint really just brings you right back in the moment, and you just want to take a drop and inhale it, and it just pulls you right back into your body. You could add a drop of frankincense to it, and that's going to oxygenate your brain at the same time and really bring you home. So this is just a little brief introduction to some of these emotional stressors.
Okay, and then I am going to go ahead and dive into grief. So my first ask is for everyone to stay curious. And when I say the word grief, it probably brings up some associations. And I'm just asking you to stay curious and maybe suspend those associations of what you think grief is for a moment. I wanted to dive into the neuroscience behind it, which I find completely fascinating. So we're going to do that. But the first thing I would love to teach you is I love experiential evidence as well. So I'm going to give you a lot of heady knowledge, but I also love to share experiences. So if you happen to have your rose, or I have neroli, bergamot, frankincense, lavender, Roman chamomile are all great choices. If you have any of those close to you, what I want to teach you is this gorgeous point that is an acupuncture point that we are going to use essential oils on. It's called Shenmen. In Chinese medicine, it is known as Heaven's Gate. And there's this little crevice here on your upper ear. If you're listening to the podcast, you can go ahead and just Google Shenmen, or if you are on our webinar, you can see the image. And what you're going to do is I just demonstrated it, but take your oil. You don't want to do anything too irritating to the skin on this point, but I'm doing neroli. You put it on your pinkies, and then you gently hold it, not pressing. This isn't acupressure. This is just holding the oil and letting the oil do its work. So the reason why I'm teaching you this is that when we are working with big experiences such as grief or such as trauma, it is really, really helpful to work on the vagal nerve, to work on our whole emotional system, and to actually get in our body, right? So this is going to, if you hold it, and usually I close my eyes and just see what you experience. What is your experience with that point? You can also smell the neroli when you move your hands off. And I just hold that point for as long as I feel that I need to. What I experience when I do that is I feel like there's an integration of my body and my mind. What I know from counseling is that often our mind likes to control things. It's a bit of a computer. The ego jumps in. It wants to understand. It wants to problem solve. And that is a beautiful thing about our minds. And it can be counterproductive sometimes as well. So if we work with our mind as it's made to work, I find it a lot easier to navigate grief. So I'm going to go ahead, if we can just switch slides. So I just have 2 slides, so we're going to dive into these visuals in a minute. But what I would like you to do now that you have held that Shenmen point is, if you can, if you're in a safe space, to close your eyes. And I want to have you imagine being really thirsty. It is 100 degrees out. You have just gone for a long walk. You are sweaty, you are overheated, your mouth is dry and parched, and you want some water. And yet, you can't get to water. There's no water around, and you are longing for this water. So I just wanted to bring that feeling into your body, just that imagining like you are really, really wanting some water and you can't have any. And the reason why I had you do this, you can open your eyes if you would like, is that what we are finding from very, very recent neuroscience is that grief is not only a sorrow and a pain, which many of us relate to grief as, but grief is actually a longing. It's a yearning or a desire for something. And so where I'm getting this information from, and I want to give credit to, is there's this great podcast. It's called Huberman Lab, and we will make the link be available. And what the neuroscientists were discovering as they were doing studies and watching the different parts of the brain that light up is that grief has a very unique way of working in our brain where it's a motivational process. It's actually desiring something. And so that's a bit different of a take than just feeling sad, right? I think it's really interesting. And I'm going to give you another example. So we know that grief can, of course, happen at the loss of a loved one. We also know that grief can happen profoundly if we lose a pet. Grief can even happen at the loss of an object if there's a deep emotional attachment to that object. So for example, to demonstrate what I'm talking about, if you've ever had a pet and your pet died, have you ever had the experience of walking into your home and expecting maybe your dog to run up and greet you as they always do, but they're not there? Or expecting your cat to come lay with you at night, but they're not there, right? So your brain has a wiring that's beyond the cortex, it's beyond the rational part that does know that your animal has died. And it's just habitual. There's a neuro wiring pattern that's saying, I expect my kitty to be there, and it's not. What I've experienced after that, and this can vary, sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's pain, sometimes it's heart-wrenching aches, but there's an emotional reaction, and the brain is sitting there going, whoa, something's not right. And so that is what I'm talking about that longing. So your brain is longing for something that it cannot have, and it often will try to problem solve getting it. But as we know, if something dies, we can't reach them. And I thought that this was so interesting. And this is because when we relate to people, we relate to them in a closeness. So not a proximity of like being physically close, but how close they are, right? If we know someone dies who maybe we see at the coffee shop every day, that will produce a certain kind of grief. And then there's a death of a deep loved one, which will be more substantial, right? Because they are closer to us. So I could go on and on about this. The podcast I listened to was 2 hours. So if you want to nerd out on this neurowiring and the studies, check out the Huberman Lab podcast. I find it fascinating. But what I want to leave you with is the combination that grief is a desire for something, and grief is actually very different than depression in our brains. So we have found that antidepressants can be effective for some people for depression. Antidepressants for grief aren't often as effective because a different part of the brain is actually being stimulated. We know that grief is complex, and depression and grief can overlap. And so that is a big take home behind grief. I also want to give credit to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who has done some very early work with grief. You all might or might not be familiar, but she introduced the 5 stages of grief. Briefly, those are going to be, I wrote them out just so I won't forget any: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and the word they use, acceptance. So what we have now found, and then the more recent science has taught us, is that when Kubler-Ross introduced this idea, she made it a linear process We actually know now that it is not a linear process, that you can jump in and out of any of those stages, and that certain individuals may or may not experience those stages. And there is also other experiences that encompass that. So it's not something on a timeline that you can measure. I do find this work very, very helpful, because sometimes when we're in grief or when we are trying to support someone who is grieving, it can get confusing, right? Like if you see someone who's really pissed off and angry, you probably might not think that's grieving, right? Maybe you just associate grieving only with sadness, right? Or maybe you're looking at a person you know and they just lost their wife and they're out at a party having fun, right? And you're thinking, what is going on? How can they be so cut off from this big experience? So we do have in our community, I have taught a whole webinar on the 5 stages of grief. I have recommended many, many oils for that, and we will connect you with that link as well. So that is, I'm working so hard to take a very complex subject and speak about it in a very short amount of time. It is, there's so much more I could say, but that's at least a piece that I would love for you to just take home, getting a little more curious of what grief is. As Louise said earlier, in my counseling program, what we have learned through counseling and through the way the brain works is we cannot control our emotions. So, and what I mean by that is like we can control them, but if we try to repress and shove down our grief through addictive qualities, which is often happens in our society, right? We see different addictions trying to say, ooh, that hurts, I don't want to feel it. What ends up happening is it shuts down the other emotions in us as well. So just know that if you are trying to shut down your grief or your pain or your anger, you are also shutting down your joy, your happiness, and your passion. So that's not a great equation. So now I'm going to move into what can we do for grief? And some great things that I just want you to know is that I have some oil recommendations if you're new so that you don't get overwhelmed. Very simple, and some of our starter kits, great oils for grief. And having said that, any essential oil is going to be phenomenal for your limbic brain and your emotional system, because aromatics go right into the brain. So you kind of can't go wrong. Pick one you like. If you want to deal with certain stages of grief, you can see on this graph here, the chemistry shows us that trees are grounding, stabilizing, and centering. Flowers are assuring, allowing, and relaxing. We think of the energetics of florals as like a rocking motion or a comforting. Herbs are often awakening, refreshing, and clarifying. So we thought about that peppermint, right? That was recommended. Well, the peppermint is going to wake you up. It's going to make you be in your body and alert. Spices are going to be invigorating, stimulating, and energizing. And citrus, brightening. You can see here, it says on the slide, I'm reading it for people who are just listening to the podcast, uplifting and cheering. So I love citrus for any kind of gloom, heaviness. It's sunshine in a bottle is how I think of the citrus oils. And so if you know this, and there are these graphs that you could take a screenshot to remind you, then really you can work with the oils you have and say, oh, where am I at? Am I in a stage of grief of anger? Maybe I would want to bring in some trees, some grounding and centering, or maybe some herbs to kind of clear that anger and move it, right? So this is a beautiful way to work with our essential oils. Very briefly, I will just say I have a recommendation of some oils that I will go through with the stages of grief. And before I do that, I have a bottle of peppermint here. And I just want to show you, I jumped ahead a little bit, but if you're very new, I want to show you, so how are we going to use this? So again, what I was saying about the brain is that the aromatics of essential oils go directly to our limbic system, and they change our neurochemistry, and they work on our emotions. You want to change your emotions very simply, just remember smell an oil. You can do that by putting a few drops in your hands, rubbing your hands together. Deep inhale and exhale. When working with grief, exhaling is going to tone the vagal system, and it's actually going to make us less stressed out and more resilient to heal from grief. Or I have a diffuser by me. I don't know if I can pull it over. I'll see. So I got a diffuser going. You can, while I'm teaching to you, I have my diffuser running. So I'm just smelling those oils, or while you sleep, while you work. That is using the oils aromatically. You can use them topically. So we started off today rubbing some oils on our shoulders, on the back of our neck. Those are two places we often hold emotions and hold tension. So by putting the oils there, we can remind the body to release and relax and integrate our emotions. And then internally. So with peppermint, you can take this one internally, putting it on the tip of your tongue if you have it handy. It's very strong. You can hear my voice. My whole body went, whoa, very, very strong. This is a lovely thing to do if anyone's in shock. So if you're in that denial stage of grief, if you're checking out of your body, if you're shocked, peppermint is a lovely oil to bring in for that stage. And you can use that. You'll be smelling it and tasting it. So those are the three ways. In short, it's aromatic, topical, and internal use. One little note is if you're new and you're confused of how can I use this oil internally, not all of them are meant to be used internally. And a way that I love to quickly check is there's a supplement fact on the back of the bottle of the ones you can use internally. It's a little square if you have bad eyes like I do. And the oils that don't have that square that says supplement facts right on top are not meant for internal use. So as I promised, and then I'm going to talk about these two, you'll see that LU1 and CV17. And if you're wondering what those are, I'll explain them to you from our slide. But first, I was just going to say as a recommendation, if you're new and you just want things simple and clear, like tell me which oil to use and tell me how to use it and where, if you're working with grief or supporting someone with grief. If you're working with the denial stage, transcend could be a gorgeous oil to work with. It's going to help you literally process and digest not only food, but digest your emotions, right? So it's got a great combination of fennel and ginger and mint in there. So that's going to help assimilate an experience. If you're in the bargaining stage, lavender, as we know, is all things soothing and calming. So this is just a gorgeous oil for grief work. Just number one recommendation. If you want to start somewhere, lavender is amazing. If you're in the bargaining stage, I would say to use, I skipped anger. I knew I messed up. So anger is peppermint. And again, these don't have to be linear. Again, I was talking about why helps bring you in your body and focus. Bargaining was lavender. Depression, wild orange, and frankincense. Remember I said that wild orange is going to be lifting, helping to take away the gloom. Really gorgeous studies on citrus oils as a highly effective antidepressants. So you can find some of those on PubMed if you're interested. And then acceptance, which breathe would be a gorgeous choice. There are many other ones. And if you're an advanced oil user, I'm going to give you a few more ideas. But if you're a beginner and you get overwhelmed easily, start there with what I've listed. If you're an advanced oil user, or if you want to try this as a beginner too, there are 2 points here that are great for grief as well. This is taken from Chinese medicine, and the top chart has 2 dots near the shoulder, on the front of the chest near the shoulders. This is known as point lung 1, and this is where a lot of grief is housed. And so you can take an oil like Breathe or Cypress. Cypress is a phenomenal oil for grief. Cypress trees are often planted in graveyards, and you can hold the oil there. And then CV17, which is right in between the nipples at the center of the chest. You'll find intuitively your finger will fall in a little divot and will kind of just naturally go there. My favorite oils for this point are rose, helichrysum, lavender would be lovely, all of the heart mending, heart nurturing. And then I was going to say, if you're supporting anyone who has recently been through a tremendous loss, some great oil recommendations are our Serenity blend, our Console blend, our Adaptive blend, or our Forgive blend. Those would be great starting places. All of those, or many of those, not all of them, but many of them have the common theme of lavender, which I mentioned. So you could even just gift a lavender or gift the lavender as a gift for yourself in your grief process. So that about wraps it up for what I wanted to share about grief. There is, of course, so much more work being done in this area. And I also want to acknowledge that I approach grief more from a neuroscience counseling perspective today, but we also know that there's phenomenal wisdom from many, many different cultures, ages, and times working with grief. So we can always bring in any of those approaches we have learned from our communities and our cultures and our faiths to help also with grief. So I hope that you find that helpful, and we'll have a little time for questions too, if anyone found any of that information confusing or had any questions for me.
Thank you, Ariana. Yeah. I know one thing, we're going to move in with Louise, right? And talking a little bit with trauma as the topics relate. One thing we were all three talking about leading up to this call was, this idea, and I don't know if people want to discuss this, like for people who aren't familiar with essential oils at all, it could be dubious about like, well, how could an oil just take away my grief? And part of the thing we want to be clear is that's not what we're doing here. So oils and working with natural medicine is not like a pill for this and popping one pill and things go away.
And if I can interrupt you for a minute, Josie, there's no one pill we can use for grief either.
Yes,
right? Like
exactly. Yes, I was gonna say sometimes in medicine there are like people have experience with one pill and it takes their thing away. But that concept is, it's very different here in that this is an incredible tool in our toolbox of life and how we work with, and in this topic with all of our emotions and our emotional wellness. And if anyone else wants to talk for a minute on this, the use of how we use oils in our life, and then in these kind of topics like grief or trauma, as friends, as adjuncts, as allies, as powerful chemical messengers interacting between our emotional self, our spiritual selves, and then our inner workings or neurochemistry, how the scents and the phytochemicals that are in oils aliven the parts of our brain, and our brain then has chemical messengers to tell other parts of our bodies to do things. There's this interaction that happens, and it's a dance, and it's intuitive, it's playful. You start with, when in doubt, start with lavender. As Ariana has said.
I know, Aisha, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, so anyone else, and then we'll move into Louise, but I thought this was kind of a nice way to anything we want to talk about at this moment.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on that because there was a really important point that I learned from that podcast from the neuroscience. And he was trying to explain that there's this fine line from healing from grief and when it becomes chronic grief, that it becomes diagnosed where it won't lift, and it's prolonged grief is, I believe, what they call it. And so he was saying there's this delicate fine line of teaching our brain that there's a change, right? So it's really important, as we've acknowledged, to feel your emotions, to honor your attachment, and that there has been a loss. But we know that cyclical thoughts, like when we are in the bargaining stage and we try to say, well, what if, perhaps someone was in a car accident and you thought, well, what if I could have left 5 minutes earlier? Our brain starts to put all these thoughts in, like, what if I would have done something different? I could have saved them. This is really common with suicide. What if I called the person back, right? And then a guilt can come on, like, I could have saved their life. Our brain will want to do that because it will want to solve an equation. But if you notice that you're doing that, please steer your brain into just acknowledging the emotions, the pain, bringing in your oils, and being gentle with yourself in that process. And that was basically what the neuroscientist, was trying to explain, is that you will heal from your grief quicker if you can integrate and teach your brain, hey, that expectation where I'm expecting my kitty to be there at the door. I have to teach my brain the kitty's not going to be there. And it's still okay to grieve the attachment for the kitty. So I hope that makes sense. It's a bit of a dance. And then I wanted to say, Louise and I were talking about this as well. This is so true. Like when the other study I wanted to say is, excuse me, I had 3 thoughts at once, so I was trying to pick which one to choose. But we found that people heal from their grief, and I would be so bold as to say this is probably true for many things. The less stressed out they are, the higher their vagus system was toned. So a simple way to tone your vagal system and help the stress response is to breathe and smell essential oils. So when we inhale, it actually increases our cortisol. It actually increases our heartbeat, right? So when we know we're in that fight or flight, we're taking deep breaths and holding our breaths. When we exhale, it actually helps reduce the heart rate and it calms the body down. So a simple thing you could do is, as I showed you when I use that aromatic use, taking that peppermint or that lavender, deep breath in, and then really focus on that exhale. It doesn't matter if it's through the nose or through the mouth. And then what's so cool is, like with the lavender, you'll have that neurochemistry that's also going in and calming the brain. And what this will look like is it will look like a practice, just like we practice music, musicians practice music. If you do yoga, you practice the yoga. If you're an athlete, you train. You're training your brain to heal and adjust to a major loss and shift. So I know that was a mouthful, but still super important information, and hopefully that can help you to tie in. So the expectation, right, isn't that you're just gonna smell an oil and feel great the next second. But I have noticed when I smell them, I do often feel a little better right then, right? So it's a great tool for the toolbox. And Aisha, I know you wanted to say something, but I just wanted to elaborate a little more.
Well, mine is a very quick share, and I think it kind of piggybacks to summarize this last bit of the conversation, and it's just my own testimonial. My dog Pepper passed away a couple years ago very suddenly. She had heart failure, dropped dead on the floor on Valentine's Day, and my grief was equal to that of losing my father. It hit me really hard. It was like debilitating grief, where I just really couldn't even function. And I just wanted to share that the essential oils made the difference in me being able to get up and go about my day versus not. So no, they didn't completely remove the grief, but they allowed me to function, and they kind of softened that heartache so I could still go about my life. So I just wanted to share that like very visceral, personal experience that I had, and the power of that, and my gratitude to have that tool in that moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. It's very powerful. Let's work with Louise and your turning towards trauma. And these are such huge subjects. We know we kind of wanting to help people a little bit. So Louise.
Thank you. This is a little bridge idea between what Ariana has just been talking about and Aisha, and how essential oils can help us move through these really big, difficult emotional processes. Think about these these big emotions as like you're in a tunnel, and you really want to move all the way through the tunnel. You don't want to get stuck in the tunnel. And so that looks like processing your trauma, processing your grief, processing your emotions. And if we go back to that curve of the nervous system, it means coming down the other side of the curve into that safe zone where we feel emotional regulation again. And I want to just briefly talk about what I mean by regulation, nervous system regulation, emotional regulation, because that's one of the key ways that we work with these big emotions. So simply stated, self-regulation means that when we're tired, we can sleep. When we're stressed, we have healthy ways to release that stress. Emotional regulation involves how we manage our emotions, how we handle sadness, joy, anger, fear, emotions. Symptoms of emotional dysregulation develop when we're unable to feel our emotions, when we get numb and shut down, or when they overwhelm us, and sometimes we'll act out or just be in more of a hypervigilant, hysterical state, or when they remain unresolved. And if we go back to the idea of that safe zone where we're in the green part of that chart where we feel emotionally regulated and safe, not everybody is born with access to that kind of safety. We live in a very unequal world. There's systemic discrimination. There are all sorts of reasons why ancestral trauma gets passed down, so that young children whose nervous systems haven't really fully had the opportunity to develop their own regulation, their caretakers might not be regulated themselves. So sometimes people are sort of born with more of a tendency towards that hypervigilant state to begin with, and it takes less of a stimulus to push them into that state of overwhelm where they can't cope with the stressor. And if you're familiar with something called the ACE score, this is something that doctors are really, it's kind of new. It's not that old that we've been talking about, but the ACE score refers to early childhood developmental challenges, such as having a parent who was incarcerated or abusive or neglectful. And if you've never heard of it, we'll send a link out with this talk, but you could also just Google ACE score and you could take the test yourself. But what we're finding out is that people with a high ACE score tend to have some physical and health problems that are probably related to their trauma. And those can include things like functional digestive problems, insomnia, muscle tension, headaches, fibromyalgia, this sort of thing. And essential oils, while they're not curing the trauma or the neglect or the abuse, can be so helpful to help our digestive system regulate. They can help us sleep. And you know how important it is when we're processing and going through big emotional processing. It's so important to get good sleep. So lavender has been mentioned several times. I just want to say lavender is like a nervous system tonic. It is going to be your best friend. You can have it in the diffuser. You can pair it with other oils, but it's going to always be there kind of as a tonic. You can take it internally. If you have trouble sleeping, try taking a couple drops in a capsule before bed. You can put it on your feet. You can use it on your spine. You can take a bath with it. Lavender is like a hug from your mother. So I know we have a lot to share, and I really want to leave a little time for people to ask questions and share their experiences, but I just want to talk a little bit more about this idea of a resiliency vortex. So when we have trauma, it often constricts our life, and we try to stay safe by maybe not putting ourselves in stressful experiences. And so one of the ways to help our nervous system become more expansive and able to tolerate a larger window of tolerance is to build tools and build a toolkit that help us with resiliency. And essential oils are that toolkit. So we can, so one of the examples that I use is we've all experienced feeling hangry, right? When your blood sugar drops, your brain stops functioning, and literally your blood goes from your brain to your stomach. It's like saying, help, help, we need help. Your adrenaline goes up, might get shaky. And if you are have a past trauma, or you're in the middle of might not be that in touch with your physical experience, and your brain might interpret it as a panic attack. And so using essential oils to pause and take a moment to just ask yourself, how do I feel physically, emotional, mentally? And then reach for something to pair with how you feel. So pause, how do I feel? I feel ungrounded. What is an oil that's going to help get me back in my body? Pause, I feel shaky. I might need some Slim and Sassy because my blood sugar just dropped. This is what I'm talking about, and it's very empowering. And the very definition of trauma is that you got past the point where you were in control of the situation. You were disempowered. So just engaging on a daily practice with asking yourself, what does my body need right now? What does my brain need right now? And then reaching for a bottle and noticing, how does it feel? That is building that resiliency vortex. And that is the power of what we're talking about right here.
Oh my gosh, I love that, Louise.
Thank you. Yeah. Here's a great little diagram. Ariana shared very early how effective essential oils are as we use them aromatically on our limbic part of our brain, which is where we process those big emotions and where our brain remembers. So our brain is designed for survival. It's not really designed for happiness. And so we pay more attention to the negative things that happen in our life because we don't want it to happen again. We want to avoid those negative things. So that gets stored in our brain to protect us. And we have to really work to teach ourselves that it's okay to experience the joy. So we all have these rhythms of contraction and expansion, and using essential oils aromatically. The olfactory bulb in our nose is so close to the limbic brain. They go right there. And in a sensory world, our sense of touch, our sense of taste, our sense of hearing, all those are processed in a different part of the brain. And smell goes right to the limbic system. It's so cool. So I don't want to, I can talk for a long time on this topic as well. And I do, just like Ariana, I did a whole webinar on trauma, and we will share that link with you for people who want to go more into depth with this. But we have some great blends we want to share with you that might be useful. Do you have any other questions, Josie, for me before we move into the shares?
Well, I know when we were talking in some of our discussions this last week, one of the things we were all kind of coming to was this idea of there is so much trauma going on right now in the world. There always has been and is, but it can feel heavy. And in our society, it seems like it's talked about more and sometimes thrown around in ways like colloquially. People I know these days are kind of like using the word like, oh my God, I'm so traumatized by I just got a bad pedicure, something. And So in that sense, can you help tease out for a second before we go, just like, how do we know if someone actually is experiencing trauma versus they just had a bad experience?
Yeah, thank you. That is a really great question. And we are not really able to judge what somebody else's experience was like for them. So if we go back to that idea of that, what is that point of overwhelm where I feel like I can't respond or recover from the stressor? That threshold is going to be different for everybody. It's going to be different based on your how much sleep you got, what your nutritional status is, what your prenatal experience was like, what kind of parents you had, what kind of racism you have experienced in your world. If you live in poverty, all these things are. It's a very complex picture, and but there is a psychological diagnosis of trauma that is used. We have complex to situations of early childhood developmental trauma. Very specifically, if a person experiences abuse or neglect when they are young, and especially if it is abuse or neglect from someone who is supposed to be their caretaker, that typically tends to be very damaging to mind and body. Whereas, a terrible pedicure can be a terrible experience and may be traumatic for somebody. I'm not going to say it's not, but there is a very big continuum, and I do think we have to be careful about throwing that word around too lightly. But we all are currently in a very difficult time where we're experiencing, I think, what we are starting to refer to as this collective trauma with, feeling unsafe at school, or feeling maybe unsafe with our neighbors. More people are acting out their anger these days. So I know that's not a very direct answer, but thank you for bringing that up.
No, that's great. I know we wanted to maybe talk about that, and
Yeah.
I'd also like to mention quickly that in one of the podcasts, and forgive me, I can't remember the doctor's name, but he actually writes out prescriptions to stop listening to the news.
Mm.
So when we think of trauma or just these big emotions, it is definitely possible to be traumatized by the news. And I think many people can relate to that in the US of the recent school shootings. So be really mindful, because we have new information systems where we're getting information very quickly from the whole world. And I was reading a study that the way our brain was formulated is really we were kind of evolved to have about 200 people in our sphere. That was kind of our village news, right? And so for us to process all of the events worldwide daily flashing on a screen very quickly with no warning is something that's very new for our brains. And so I loved that doctor's prescription, which is not to be non-aware or not. I'm not saying just bury your head in the sand, but at what point are we just starting to actually traumatize ourselves by listening to all of the horrors over and over again, right?
And being a healthcare worker through a pandemic, being a frontline, essential worker, not feeling valued, all of these things, being a mental health practitioner and hearing and experiencing other people's trauma secondarily is affects us as well. So it's a very big issue, and luckily we have a lot of tools, and we haven't had enough time to talk about all the tools in this talk. So I really hope you'll take some time to check out some of those links that we'll send out with the show notes. Just real quick, this is a beautiful, beautiful blend, and at the it's referenced here with Amy Cuddy's TED Talk. If you're not familiar with this researcher, she talks about the physical changes that happen when we change our posture. And she did some research that showed that the Wonder Woman pose, standing tall with your hands on your hips and your chest high and your head held high, gives you a boost of testosterone and cortisol that makes you feel more powerful and helps you tackle some challenging situations. So go listen to her TED Talk and make up this wonderful blend to use along with it. I'm a real big fan of using essential oils on our feet. And if you are feeling ungrounded and like your energy is swirling around your head a lot, use some of those rooting oils: vetiver, anchor, balance, cedarwood, patchouli, spikenard. Let's see, what would be a beginner's oil for that? Maybe frankincense on the bottom of your feet.
Balance.
Balance, absolutely.
Balance is probably our first big beginner one for grounding and rooting on the bottom of the feet.
I made a trauma blend with rose for divine love, frankincense for truth, bergamot for self-acceptance, myrrh, Mother Earth. Helichrysum is our big trauma oil for pain. Roman chamomile for spiritual purpose. Vetiver for centering and descent. Geranium for love and trust. And then this is a blend I call Revive the Mind. Rosemary, eucalyptus, lime, Douglas fir, cedarwood, frankincense, and lemon. So this is a great one if you feel like you're shrinking down and feeling foggy and under the blankets of your emotional experience, and you need to be able to wake up and be able to see the horizon and know that there's another world out there. And we have a lovely testimonial. Josie will take it from
All
here.
right. Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Ariana. So we're going to be closing the call with Erin, and from our group, she has her own testimonial and her recommendation. And I want to thank everyone for joining us. I wanted to answer the one person on the Zoom asked, what do practitioners use when hearing secondary? So all day taking in or hearing trauma. And I would like to, everything that we've talked about. So the oils, we use the oils in many different ways. If you're new, my recommendation would be Melaleuca, which is tea tree oil. And they have a nice version doTERRA does with a touch or roller, and rolling it on your, the creases here, right? In your wrists, and rubbing it in and using it topically, and doing that throughout the day as you're seeing patients.
And on your belly, solar plexus and belly button.
Belly button, solar plexus, wonderful place to start. Mm-hmm. All right, so thank you, everyone. Erin, are you with us?
I'm here. Thank you so much, Ariana and Dr. Rose. That was amazing. I'm going to close out the call with first my testimony, and then just a few tidbits of how you can get your own essential oils if you don't have them yet, and a little teaser for what we're doing next week. So I so appreciate this information because I am a trauma survivor. My ACE score is an 8. Now, I didn't know what any of that meant until the last couple of years, but I came to the essential oils about 14 years ago, and I came to the essential oils with my life absolutely falling apart. Kind of everything they say you're more likely to have happen with a high ACE score. Bad with relationships, bad with jobs, bad with finances, struggling with anxiety, with depression, and with all kinds of unexplained health issues. To the point where when I went to my doctor, they couldn't give me any answers except to say, you need to go on medication for the mental health issues that you're having. So that was extremely frustrating. And I started to learn about essential oils, and I immediately, after attending a few webinars and a few workshops, I just started working with the oils. And so in the beginning, I would carry Citrus Bliss, Balance, Serenity, and Vetiver in my purse. And what I love so much about the essential oils for someone who is a trauma survivor and who does struggle with anxious thoughts, deep sadness, disassociation in a big way, and invasive thoughts, is the essential oils are something that I can grab at any moment. It's in my purse or it's in my pocket. And when I take a deep inhale, just like Dr. Rose was saying, I come back into my body. I start to go, oh, I'm here. This is me. This is this nice smell. So I've used those oils for the better part of 14 years, and I found incredible, incredible healing. Now I am a mother of 2 kids under the age of 5. So do I have any moms here? Anybody who's dealing with toddlers right now? I am triggered on a daily basis when they are crying and they are playing with each other, all the noise, all the people touching my body. I'm triggered all day long. And I have learned one really simple technique that I want to share with you that just brings me back. I do it for at least 2 minutes a day, twice a day, and I love to use essential oils with it. And it's called alternate nostril breathing. So I don't know that much about alternate nostril breathing. I know we have a lot of yogis here who could probably teach a whole webinar on it, but it's a chiropractor that I go to who said to me, do alternate nostril breathing because it brings your central nervous system kind of like back into balance. So what I do is I take an oil. It really doesn't matter what oil, but I like frankincense, lavender, sandalwood, or rose. And I have frankincense today. So I invite you, if you have your oil and you just want to do a couple of cycles of breath with me, you'll feel what I mean. I simply take my frankincense and I like to anoint my third eye with it. And then I put a little bit in my hand, rub it together. And alternate nostril breathing is you put your finger right in between your eyebrows. You have one finger on the left nose, the thumb over on the right nose, and you're going to close one nostril. So I've got my thumb closing my right nostril, and I'm going to inhale through my left. So, and then I'll hold it and exhale through my right. And you just cycle through that a few times. Inhale through the right. Hold. Exhale through the left. Inhale through the left. Hold. Exhale through the right. And we'll stop there. Just notice how lovely that feels, how recentering and grounding. So my testimony is that no, essential oils don't heal trauma. They don't take away my past. But what they do is they give me a tool that I can reach for throughout the day, no matter what's going on, and I'm able to ground, come back into my body, set off that symphony of chemicals in my brain. And I truly believe that I may not still be here, and I definitely wouldn't be thriving if I hadn't found aromatherapy when I did. So I hope that if you or someone you know is struggling with some of these emotions or with the aftermath of trauma or grief, that you introduce them to aromatherapy. And of course, it's not going to be the cure-all, but it's going to be an incredible tool. So thank you so much for letting me share. I am going to transition now, so you can stop that screen if you want. And I just want to close the call for today. We hope that you like this new format. Could you please tell us in the chat if you enjoy the new format and the new timing? We're really, really grateful to the presenters and everyone who tuned in. If you want to know more about any topic that we talked about here, of course, we'll send out that email. You do need to make sure you're on the email list. So go to hellovisionary.life and the little pop-up will be there for you to sign up with the email list. You can also go into our oil education tab and go into the oil education directory and search any topic that you want. We're always going to try to cover some main points in this call, and I think the ladies did a really good job. I'm just going to review to make sure that those of you who are new or anyone wanting a refresher know some of the basics of essential oils. So it is important to know that when you have doTERRA essential oil specifically, you've got a safe oil, you have oil that's effective, and the oils are extremely affordable. We were shown examples of how to use them. So the Shen Men, that would be a topical use. Inhaling the vetiver or the lavender or the frankincense, like we did with the alternate nostril breathing, that's an aromatic use. Internal could be that dab of peppermint to bring you out of shock or denial or disassociation. You heard a little bit about why doTERRA is so amazing, and we could go into much talk about this, but basically they're giving you a pure and potent essential oil. They're dedicated to sustainability and they're dedicated to leadership. The company is completely debt-free and their whole mission is to be free to give so they can really uplift the planet. If you would like to purchase one of the oils that we talked about in this call, please talk to the person who invited you today. And in fact, I wanted you to know that we chatted about frankincense, digestion, peppermint, tea tree, and lavender. And those all come in our Home Essentials Starter Kit. What's really cool about the starter kits is when you open a doTERRA account and you get a starter kit, your wholesale account fee is free. So just talk to the person who invited you and they'll help you get started. So next Monday, we're going to be back here at 5 p.m. Pacific time, and we are talking with Nikki Dean and Haley Jones all about your summer camping and hiking trips. We're going to make sure that you're prepared with first aid ideas, things that'll help you with bug bites, sore muscles, and just really what you want to make sure is packed in your bag for all that summer fun. So take a moment right now and jot down a few names of people that you know that love to go hiking and camping during the summer. Invite them to the call next week. So this kind of brings me to a really important perk about your doTERRA membership, if you didn't already know. But when you share essential oils with people, you have the opportunity to earn a commission check. So doTERRA will give you a 20 to 25% commission check when somebody that you introduce to doTERRA goes ahead and gets their wholesale account started. So be sure to talk to the person who invited you if you want to learn how to make sure you have your account set up for that correctly. So we just love learning and growing with all of you, and we hope that you experience deep wellness and sustained peace as you bring these essential oils into your home. So thank you again to everyone that contributed to the call, and we'll see you next week.
Yay. Thank you, everyone.